World Spaceflight News Special Report.
In just 3 flight days, we've gone from the surface of the Earth to more than halfway to the Moon, and we are setting up for a key decision gate tomorrow, which is to decide, as part of a pre-planned and a pre-mission decision gate, whether to enter the distant retrograde orbit. And to date, all the systems look favorable for that, but we're going to continue to gather systems performance information and data on the Orion spacecraft before making a conscious decision to commit to that distant retrograde orbit as part of the outbound powered flyby, which is the first of a 2-maneuver sequence. In terms of flight test objectives, as we talked prior to the mission, we have 4 primary objectives. Priority 1 is demonstrate the vehicle at lunar reentry conditions. Priority 2 is to demonstrate the vehicle in the flight environment. Priority 3 is to retrieve the vehicle, and priority 4 is what we call bonus objectives associated with science, technology demonstrations, and outreach to each and every one of you. We have completed the first half of priority 1 with the Space Launch System delivering Orion to the point of translunar injection and putting all of the kinetic and potential energy into the spacecraft, and now we need to take that out, and we will realize the second half of that objective on entry and splashdown day. Priority 2 and priority 4, we are 20% complete with the objectives. 26 of 124 objectives are already complete. We have 40% of the remaining objectives, or 50 of the 124, in progress, and then we have about 40% or 48 of the 124 remaining ahead of us. But overall, the mission in just 3 short days is proceeding and exceeding expectations. In terms of payloads, we did successfully deploy all 10 of the 10 CubeSats. We are getting reports from a number of the payload customers that show that half of them are successfully executing their mission. The other half are working through a series of issues with either intermittent communications or just some of the CubeSats themselves are having difficulties. One of those is a success story that we were concerned about prior to flight, which was the Luna HMAP CubeSat that we were concerned had a low battery state of charge. That one actually is on path to have a successful mission. The payloads on board Orion, 3 of the 4 that we have, we don't get any real-time telemetry data from. The bio experiment number 1, all that data is recorded on board and recovered post-flight. The ESA active dosimeter experiment, again, is recorded on board and recovered post-flight, as well as the Matryoshka Asco-Rad experiment, or MARE experiment, that is recorded on board and recovered post-flight. But the Callisto technology demonstration payload has checked out. We've checked it out through the Deep Space Network. We've had a Snoopy sighting in the cockpit, and we are setting up for the first guest event in the next couple of days, and I won't get in front of that and spoil that one for you. But I will have a bit of a spoiler alert on some Easter eggs in the cockpit. We do have some Easter eggs in the full view of the cockpit. So when you do get that view of the cockpit, happy hunting, folks. In terms of just overall systems performance, we've met each and every day of the mission. We met the day of launch at 5 p.m. on the 16th. For about an hour, we saw some performance funnies associated with the star trackers that caused us to pull together an anomaly resolution team. And that anomaly resolution team has concluded. We concluded that today. And it had to do with what we call dazzling of the star trackers with thrusters and thruster plumes actually being picked up with these highly sensitive instruments. So we worked through that, and there was some great leadership by the Orion team and the folks that work with Jim Geffrey and Jeff Radigan to resolve that one. On flight day 2, we did meet again as a mission management team for the first time here in Houston, and we met for just under 2 hours, and that was largely just get settled in, review the status of the mission. We did go through 13 anomalies and funnies Most of those are relatively benign, or what I would call the team learning about the system performance and learning how to operate it in the flight environment, or to interact between the ground and the spacecraft as we fly along. And then today we met to review the Orion spacecraft performance, and Jim will give you some highlights on it, but it is exceeding performance expectations, and it was actually fun to see the team come in and report on the Orion spacecraft performance. We did close out that anomaly resolution team associated with the star trackers, and we also celebrated a stalwart within the Orion program whose last day is today, Mark Kirisich, the former Orion program manager. So it was fun to see him share that moment where he got to recognize that his thumbprints are on the Orion spacecraft after his many years as within the program on his final day as an NASA employee. So that was a fun thing to share with him. In terms of just imagery, we've got a couple of items that we'll share with you. If we could cue up the first video, which is from the launch of the Orion spacecraft and the Space Launch System rocket. We've got the big physics of launch on full demonstration here for you. This is the rocket lifting off from the point of view of the Space Launch System and then doing its roll off the pad, and you can see the plume heading down towards the pad and just the rocket lighting up the Space Coast, and it was quite a sight for those that got to be there and feel it. You got to feel it in your bones. It was a remarkable launch. The next video that we've got for you is of the Orion spacecraft looking back at itself while it's mated to the interim cryo propulsion stage. And there's a bit of an Easter egg in this video, too. If you look in the top center, you can actually see the core stage after separation below it. And this is one of the solar array wingtip cameras looking back at the main body of the interim cryo propulsion stage, as well as the spacecraft adapter. And then the aft half where the avionics ring is and the RL-10 engine is just off to the screen to the right. But to me, this was just a remarkable photo because we are some 975 plus miles in altitude here, and you see the core stage falling away back towards Earth, and this was just a remarkable video as well. And then the last one that we've got for you is of the solar array wings articulating for the perigee raise maneuver. And this is Orion looking at itself, and you can see the Earth below the spacecraft. We position the solar array wings to the load-bearing configuration for the perigee raise maneuver, and then we had the load-bearing event, and then we reconfigured them back and fully articulated them to the sun-pointing position. So these are just a few small highlights of what we've seen in the 3 short flight days, and it's been a remarkable mission to date, and we're proud to share all of this with you. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Sandra.
It's a good reminder that this is the first time in 50 years that a human exploration spacecraft has left low Earth orbit and been sent to the moon. As Mike said, Orion's been performing great so far. All the systems are exceeding expectations from a performance standpoint, and we have full mission functionality with the upcoming outbound powered flyby burn. The team's been able to gather a lot of great data to learn how those systems are performing in space. The separation of Orion from the interim cryo propulsion stage. Once the ICPS finished its job and sent us on through the TLI, Orion fired its pyrotechnic frangible nuts and separated from the ICPS. You can see in this video as we slowly drift away from the ICPS and head off to the moon. On the next video, we'll see how the solar arrays have been articulating during the deployment event. There's 4 different solar arrays on board Orion. Each are about 4 meters long. And one of the things we've already learned from the mission is that we're collecting more power than we expected. Altogether, we have over 13 kilowatts of power that can power the equipment on board. The deployment went great, and as you saw earlier, we were able to put those into position for the TLI burn. Other systems have also been performing fantastically. We've had better than expected heat rejection. We're using less power than anticipated. So all these things are giving us good confidence in being able to move forward with the mission.
It'll be about 34 minutes that we won't have comm with the vehicle. And so I'm sure we'll all take a little break and then come and sit and wait for the data to come back. This is absolutely a critical burn. It's one that Orion has to perform. But of course, it's got the OMS engine, which is the primary way of doing the burn, as well as additional auxiliary engines, such that if we have an issue with the OMS engine, the auxiliary engines will pick up and complete the burn. And we designate it as critical, which is why we configure the software to ensure that that burn happens. And there's a couple of those in the mission that we have. The vehicle's going to do a great job.
It'll be a 2.5 minute burn, 2.5 minutes. In that, we use about 2,900 pounds of Orion's initial propellant load. That's about 20% of the total load that we start the mission with. So relatively short burn, but it is one of the 4 big ones that we perform as part of the mission.
Thank you for your question as well on the pad. The team is currently working through the pad post-launch inspections. There are a number of hazards out there that they're working through. We did anticipate some amount of damage, and they are finding some amount of damage. Again, the vehicle produced 8.8 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. We did, for the very first time with a rocket of this class with solids, have a ignition overpressure and sound suppression system in place. So, if you recall watching right at that initial, the final seconds before liftoff, there was a huge amount of water that came from that water tower that sits within the pad perimeter, and all that water came out of that tower, went down the pipe, across, and up onto through some piping into the surface of the mobile launcher, and that was purposefully there to dampen the acoustic shock as the rocket lifted off, because that can come down and bounce back up towards the rocket. So that water was there to dampen the acoustic shock, to largely protect the rocket. We couldn't put water everywhere on the mobile launch tower. The umbilicals did fine. The structure itself did fine, but we are finding some damage. For me, the most impressive photo that I've seen from damage was the blast doors on the elevators were removed through the pressure wave of the rocket, and they're having to restore that functionality with the elevators. So there are a number of findings. And because of the inconvenience, now we don't have elevators functioning at the mobile launcher, and it is a very tall structure. Folks are having to walk up and down it, and it's taken them a little extra time to get through it. But that said, the mobile launcher itself performed well. We just are having to work our way through some of the damage assessments, and it's taken us a little longer. In terms of the CubeSats, you wanted to know which others were successful. Argo Moon, which is a partnership with the Italian space agency, BioSentinel, which is basically an analog that's flying some yeast to measure radiation. Equilus, which is a partnership with the Japanese exploration agency, Lunar HMAP, and then I believe Omotenashi, which is another Japanese exploration agency CubeSat, are on a path to success. The remainder, as we've had reported from our payload partners, either have encountered technical issues post-deploy, or have had intermittent communications, or in one case did not acquire signal with their communication asset that they had planned. So the anomaly resolution team, as it pertains to the star trackers, we got together as a team the afternoon of the 16th, which was it was a 5 p.m. call, so some 12-ish hours after launch, and we knew that there was just some anomalous performance in the star trackers, and it took the team some time to work through it. And the Orion program and one gentleman in particular, Ryan Proud, that led that anomaly resolution team, did a fantastic job of researching all the potential causes. And what we determined, it was not the hardware. The hardware was operating exactly as it was designed to. It was actually an environmental situation where the thrusters were being picked up by the star tracker because it was actually thrusting over the field of view of the star tracker by design, and the light was hitting the plume and it was picking it up, and it was having a hard time understanding, was that a star or an object out there that I should track, or maybe there were objects in the field of view when it thought there shouldn't be, because the star trackers are programmed to know where the stars are, and it was essentially confusing the star tracker, and we continued on both star trackers 1 and 2 to get what they call a component not ready flag. So it took us a little bit of time to work through that one. The star trackers were gathering data throughout, and it was just one of these episodic things that took some time to resolve. The team correlated it to thruster firings, and it just took a little bit of time to do that. In terms of operational changes, there are no operational changes. We are proceeding, and that was one of the outbrief recommendations today from that anomaly resolution team as we sunset that team, was to consider the star trackers operating normally and to proceed based on that information.
The ITAR issue at 39B, what was the situation or the configuration that prevented, I guess, the photographers from going out and picking up remote cameras till today? I guess they were told that there was some ITAR considerations. And then also, I just wanted to make a comment in light of the anomaly resolution team, and it sounds like it was an interesting episode, but that information hasn't been included in any of the updates that were posted so far. And you all talk so much about how important this mission is, and that it's the first human spacecraft in 50 years, and your number 4 of your objectives is public outreach. I would just request that whatever you can do to provide more detailed and more timely status reports of the mission, even if things are not all knit together and here's the outcome. It's really important to kind of be able to follow along as these things are happening. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Irene, and I certainly understand your feedback on the star tracker, what I'll call glitch or anomaly. That one was not a high-level concern. It just was one of those what I'll call confusing discrepancies that took us a little bit of time to work through. But I certainly understand the feedback there. And in terms of the ITAR issue, I am not fully up to speed on the issue at pad 39B, but what has been shared with me is that the mobile launcher has flight interfaces on it that are considered export controlled, and not all of those are in a configuration that are ready to be photographed and shared. And there's some amount of work that needs to be done to get those in a configuration. And prior images that have been shared were either shared at a low enough resolution where that was not an issue, or were shared such that the umbilical interfaces were not in a full view, such that they were export or ITAR controlled. So that's my understanding of it. I am not an ITAR expert, but that's what I know on that particular topic, and I understand why you're asking, and I would just ask for your patience as we work through that one.
I do want to address the star trackers real quick, in that We never had a case where we violated the flight rules. The star trackers were functioning sufficient that we could continue on with the mission. It was really a case where we were seeing something we didn't understand. And so you are correct that we do need the star trackers to continue on with the mission, but at all times they were providing us measurements that were able to allow the mission to proceed. And so while we saw something we didn't quite understand, the hardware was operating sufficiently that we were able to continue the mission. And of course, we talk in what if it doesn't work, but in this case, it continued to work sufficiently well enough for us to continue on while the team really investigated what was going on at the time.
Yeah, and Jeff, I think you hit the nail on the head there. We were meeting the functionality requirements for attitude updates and navigation updates with the star trackers. So from a system performance and system functionality standpoint, that one was not violating the flight rule. It was, again, something that we didn't fully understand, and we needed to get a brain trust together to work through it, and it didn't take that long. That said, I understand again the feedback, Bill, and apologize that we didn't share that sooner. This is a bit of a marathon in terms of launching from the Kennedy Space Center, getting safely through translunar injection. We provided an update to each and every one of you after launch, and that was after a very long day. And then I'm speaking for myself. I think I went and took a nap at the hotel for about 3 hours, and then was notified that we had a funny with the star tracker. We did note that, and then I believe we noted that, and then we had the anomaly resolution discussion the afternoon of the 15th. Again, I'm speaking for myself. I took a power nap, and then got on a plane here to Houston the next day, and then we settled in and we worked our way down the funny list, and that was on the funny list, and we had over a dozen funnies on the list. So we are proceeding, given the information that we have, and that was not seen as a hard constraint. It was just something that we just didn't understand. It was initially outside of our experience base, but again, understand the feedback on that one. In terms of hazards at the pad, there were some gas line leaks that are used to inert the system, both on the nitrogen and the helium side. Those in of themselves are hazards, right? There's asphyxiation, and we need to worry about those types of things. But simply having some amount of damage and the inconvenience of not being able to fully assess the mobile launcher, given the elevator blast door issue, is something that's just causing us to take a little more time. So the team is proceeding out of an abundance of caution to get the full system status for the mobile launcher, and they're working their way through that. I would just again ask for a little bit of patience as we work through it. It's been 2 days since we launched, and it's just taken a little bit of time.
Words about how the software works. So the star tracker is constantly outputting its attitude knowledge, and the onboard software of Orion is looking for that information. Occasionally, when we see this dazzling phenomenon, the software may get a flag or generate a flag saying, I'm not ready to incorporate that data into my navigation filter. Now, this is a temporary situation. The star tracker keeps trying to acquire attitude knowledge, and when it's ready, it then clears that flag, and the software is able to reset and keep going. So this is a phenomenon we will expect to continue periodically throughout the rest of the mission. However, as we've moved away from Earth, we've seen less occurrences of it, but the system and the software is set up to deal with that and continue generating attitude information just fine. As for the location, on the aft end of what we call the crew module adapter is what's called a navigation base. Here we have two star trackers mounted in 90 degrees apart, as well as the optical navigation system, which is a different camera is used to help navigate through deep space. So these cameras, the star trackers and the optical navigation camera, are located at the aft end here. And if you recall the orientation of the service module, there are pods of reaction control thrusters oriented throughout 90 degrees apart. One of these pods is located pretty close to the star tracker base, and that's what is causing the dazzling phenomenon. But it's a very tightly packed orientation. We have radiators and star trackers and many other equipment on that service module. And so this is just something that teams have seen in past spaceflight, and we're prepared to deal with it with no impact to the mission.
In terms of our readiness to commit to the distant retrograde orbit and the decision gate tomorrow, there is nothing that sticks out as a clear no-go or a lean against what we've seen. Of the 13 funnies that we've seen, we talked about the Star Tracker component ready flag. We had a coolant loop 1 flow rate funny, where we saw a momentary drop in the flow rate, and it's happening episodically, which indicates that there's gas in that fluid line that has a propylene glycol water mixture. We're getting proper cooling on the coolant loop 1 specifically. We've seen a number of issues with file transfers from the solar array wingtip cameras. They have memory and recorders on board. They use a Wi-Fi system to get imagery into the cockpit. Obviously, imagery, we love it. We want to share it as much as we can. We want to record it. But if we're having issues getting it off of the vehicle, that actually slows the effort to share things with the team. And Jeff and his team in the FOD team in Mission Control have worked through that. They've kind of figured out how to work through the system. And part of this is with the Deep Space Network and understanding when we have the ability to do that. We did have a number of communications glitches, some of which are behind us during the launch phase. We had either forward or return link problems, but we did capture a lot of data during the launch phase. And we've seen that the spacecraft is running a little hotter when it flies tail to sun, but it's certainly well within limits. So those and some other micro switches and brake latch indications on the solar array wings, all those, the team has documented, worked through to understand, is this a thermal thing? Is it a micro switch thing? But overall, the system is performing really well. And right now, we don't have any again, hard leans or hard no-goes against the commit point to the outbound powered flyby. But that said, that decision gate is tomorrow. There's always a chance that something could happen between the time that we're talking and tomorrow, and our risk posture and our situation could change. So we're just going to wait. We're going to give it more time. We're going to give the teams more time to assess all the data that we have and to continue to shake down the spacecraft as we head outbound and wait for that decision gate and make that decision when it's time. It's not time to make that decision right now. You got to recall that the distant retrograde orbit is a non-Earth return trajectory. We are deliberately going to put ourselves in an orbit about the moon and stress test this vehicle. So before we do that and before we commit to it, we're going to look at every rock. We're going to turn every rock over. We're going to make sure that we understand thoroughly what each of these things mean that don't match what we were predicting, and that's what you're seeing and that's what you're hearing.